All right, then. So in that case, you should see the announcements out there that mini project ones have been graded. Um, Look for the feedback in there. If you got questions on the feedback, by all means, send me an email and I'll be happy to go over it, adjust scores if need be, or whatever else that makes sense. For the most part, most people did well. I think the only thing that most people missed on mini project one was they didn't go back and double check to make sure that you were getting 10 data points. Most of you had like 9 data points. Um, some of them went above and beyond to go make sure they had 10. So one way that they did that was to pull 20 data points and then just trim to the last 10. That way they always had 10 available as to what came out of there. Um, so that kind of stresses the importance of making sure that you check out your code when you're all said and done, go through the little checkpoints and make sure that everything that you're looking for is actually there. Even if you pulled 10 days in the actual request from Y Finance, it more than likely didn't show up with 10 full data points, is what I'm finding. So good news is on that assignment, most of you missed 1 point. So you got a 99 out of 100. Like it didn't really kill your grade at all. The ones that hurt the grade the most were they didn't actually do the README, or they messed up their PIP requirements file. That's usually the two hardest ones. To be clear on the PIP requirement stuff, make sure that you actually have the PIP requirements, and then on your README, you have them use the PIP requirements. If you just list all the packages, like say pip install Y Finance, pip install matplotlib, etc., the problem with that is when you tell them to do that, it's going to pull different software versions and it could inadvertently break your code. As a matter of fact, we had that happen during one semester where students were doing that. I followed their directions and their code would not execute because it was a newer version already. It was literally 3 days later. So make sure that you're using the pip requirements file. The whole point of that is that it freezes the specific software versions and make sure that I install the exact software versions. Even though I'm checking out your project and I'm checking out whatever it is, 30 of these things at once, I follow your directions in the README. If your program doesn't execute based off your README, I don't give you the points on the sections that are there, kind of thing. Even if I know I'm just supposed to go run the main.py file, if your instructions don't tell me that, your project doesn't tell me that, right? That's why you see 20 points dedicated to the README file. Like it's not just a simple, I give you a template and you copy and paste it in, but you still got to kind of fill it out to make sure everything's there. Please use that template. The whole point was to save you time and energy and make sure that it follows a certain format and the things are in there. So just follow that placeholder. Because if any of you go out to GitHub and find a project, what's the first thing you do? You read the README file to figure out, one, if it's what you want and how to actually install it. If those instructions are wrong, the project doesn't work. So do you have something, Jamie?
Yeah, on that README, when we write that, or it kind of sounds like you're expecting us to write it like you have no knowledge at all. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, there again, because at the end of the day, those mini projects are now on your GitHub page. So even though I know what the assignment is, they should be written in a way that you would be pulling the material out. Now, you can have the part where it's like run git clone your project name, things like that. Or you could just get them to where they check it out. That part I'm not as worried about. Obviously, I need to clone your project to make it work. I'm more worried about, like, for example, if you have Python main.py when you're running the file, but you change the file name to something else, then make sure that your Python some other file name.py is what you have in the README. You know what I mean? As long as I can execute your project based off your instructions and everything executes, perfect. I'm not worried about slight deviations. I'm just making sure your code actually runs.
Okay, so you're truly just going off of what we put in the README.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So if you leave that part out, I don't know how to run your project. The point there again, that's why I give you 20% of your grade is that README file. I'm stressing the importance of making sure that you do a correct README.
Okay.
In my eyes, without a good README, the project's kind of null and void. You know what I mean? Only your hard code Python guys are going to go actually read the code to figure out what your stuff did. And if you don't even have comments in your code, you know, the less people are going to consume your project is the point. Um, and like in your case, like if I remember right, Jamie, you had a separate file with the name of all of your stocks. That's perfectly fine because your project's written in a way that it's there. One thing that you could do in that regard that I didn't necessarily request, but you could say update the mystocks.py with the stocks that you would want to change, kind of thing. In the past, that's what I used to do, is have it to where people could put their own stocks in, or it would prompt you to provide it for stocks. I took that out because the grading time on that was tremendous. Like, it sounds like it's not a big thing, but it adds 3 minutes to add the right stocks in there, especially if your project doesn't work. Multiply that out by 30 students. We now have 90 minutes tacked on to grading just because I have to put in 4 quotes. So,
And I think on my README, I think I put something in there about there. I didn't know if I needed to or not, so I kind of
yeah.
erred on the side of caution there.
Yep, and that's why it worked, right? So that there,
Mhm.
the more detailed you put in a README, you can't overdo a README. Put it that way. If it's nice, it's clean. Some of them went above and beyond what the template did, and I'm totally fine with that because it is a reflection of your work. The template is just that; it's a template. It was a place for you to copy and paste, fill out the sections. If you want to go in more in depth, do more in depth. The only thing I do ask is if you are having them do a command of some type, like pip install -r requirements.txt, make sure that's in the command structure of Markdown, right? So it's 3 backticks, then the command, then 3 backticks kind of thing. It should be in that markup language. And that's part of the requirement. If you read the requirements for last, whatever that was, that would have been in week 5 here, right? Part of that requirements is that you use the GitHub flavor of Markdown. So I expect you to be using the correct version and the correct syntax of Markdown for that, and be thorough on those explanations. So that's exactly what you did. That's why you get the points. Other than that, it was pretty straightforward. Some people did do the graph.show before they did graph.savefig, and therefore it just saved a white file, right? So you always have to do savefig before we do the .show. That was in the video. We talked about that. And if they did it ahead of time, there again, if you check out your project and follow your own instructions, you would catch that right off the bat that those files weren't working correctly. So really important that you take the time to do that. If anybody has any issues or concerns with Mini Project 2, like, hey, I got that feedback. I probably did the same thing on Mini Project 2. I would like a chance to fix that. Now's your chance to fix that. Because as I start to go through and grade these, it's going to be a while as I get through them, kind of thing. So not to mention, we're what, 2-3 weeks since the original due date. Due date was the 21st of September. So lots of time to go through and check your stuff. All right, so getting into this week, we're really going to start to get into the meat and potatoes of this class, which is Flask and Django. So these are 2 big web frameworks. All right, and so what we want to do with those 2 web frameworks is we have Flask, which is kind of a mini framework. You're going to do a lot of manual stuff with Flask. It's meant to be no bells and whistles, no frills. You add that stuff in if you want it, which is great because you can make very simple projects very simple without a lot of overhead. And so in this, we are going to go through Flask. We'll record a video today. We'll record a video on Thursday. We may even hit a third part, just depends on how we work through the material. And that I give you a lot of reference points down here. So the Flask documentation. This tutorial is primarily what we're going to do here for the next week and a half. You will have a quiz by the time you're done with all that. That quiz will be due on the 19th. So not this weekend, but next weekend. All right. There's some reference guides for Jinja templates. We'll talk about what those are. And then if you feel like you need more coverage of Flask after these 2 weeks because you want to use it on your final project, and you so choose to get more help, there is a Udemy course that I linked here. I don't know if it's still valid. Let's find that out. Of course, it's going to say that. Okay, it should link you out there if you don't have that. Again, it's not something you have to purchase, but if you are somebody that likes to have more material, the one it should link you to is made by Jose, I can't remember his name. Very good, very easy to listen to, very easy to follow along with, lots of direction, that kind of stuff. So if you choose to use Flask and want to spend, it's usually $15 or something like that for a little extra training material. You are welcome to do that, but you absolutely do not have to. I myself follow his because once you buy it, you get the automatic updates. So if they release a newer version of Flask, you automatically get access to the new training. Usually is the way it goes. So, and then you will have mini project 3 that will not be due this week. It will not be due at the end of next week. It will be due a week after that. So you will technically have 3 weeks to be working on this mini project. Does that make sense? So the way that works out is this week we'll do the tutorial. Next week we'll try to finish up the tutorial. You'll get started on your mini project. Then we are going to move on to Django, and you will have that week to finish up your Flask project. You may be done a week ahead of time, but I give you a little bit of extra time as we get through the tutorial. Every year is a little bit different, but I try to give you a little extra time. That one, when we get to mini project 3, that'll be a hard deadline in order to get you guys grading and everything back. I do have to set that, but you get 3 weeks to work on that as opposed to a normal 1 week like you've been having in the past. Okay. Anybody got any questions? By the way, this is week 8 and 9. So again, this is 2 weeks worth of material that we'll be covering in this topic. All good? Jamie, Rafat, you guys got any questions?
Hey, Jason, I was a little bit late to the meeting. So what are we covering this week?
Yeah,
in today's class.
Flask. Yep.
Okay.
And we'll be going through the tutorial. So I'll be walking you through the tutorial. I'll talk about key points that you need to pay attention to. Things when it comes to your mini project you'll need to pay attention to, as well as if you choose to use this framework for your final project, things you should pay attention to. But their tutorial does a pretty good job of getting you stepped up. So I use it as a basis, and then we kind of fill in some extra information along the way.
So Jason, do you expect to have multiple videos over Flask then?
Yeah, so typically there's at least 1 to 2 parts. Sometimes there's 3 parts.
Okay.
It really depends on how many questions you guys ask, that kind of thing. Usually it's 1 to 2 parts on Flask, and then we'll have a video about starting the mini project, and then you'll have a whole nother week to finish that mini project. Cool. All right. So the Flask documentation link, again, Flask is a real lightweight WSGI web application framework. So it's designed to get you started on a quick and easy with the ability to really scale up to a complex application. So you can use it really super lightweight. You can actually have like a 1-page deal, kind of like Streamlit, that would just get it up and going real fast. But this is significantly different than Streamlit. If you notice in Streamlit, all these niceties and features are built in, right? So for example, ST-Write, ST-Plot, all those other things, they're really baked in to give you this robust framework. Flask is significantly meant to be lightweight. Like, I want to run this on a Raspberry Pi, or even more, I want to run this on a watch with an embedded Linux processor. It will absolutely do that. So it's a really cool one to use with Python if you want a really lightweight page and you just need to get something up and going fast. We will work with the installation and stuff. We'll get to that when you guys go to the far end. But Flask itself will depend on the Wurzog or the Wurzug WSGI toolkit, and we'll talk about that. It uses the Jinja template system, which will kind of get you introduced to that. Django will use the Jinja 2, which is just a modified version of that. It also takes advantage of the Click CLI toolkit, and we'll be able to point you out to their documentation as we go through there as needed. This Jinja template is really awesome. If you guys have written HTML before, you know you have to write a bunch of HTML and CSS. And if, for example, say you have this bulleted list here, right? If you had all of these in a list in Python, then in the actual template, all you have to do is say for item in list, print list, or print item. And it would, just like you would in Python, right? It would actually spit these out with all the CSS and HTML formatted. So it's really cool to do Python type stuff directly in your HTML file. That's what Jinja is all about. Okay. One example of something I've done with that, not necessarily Flask, but Jinja templates in general. Let me see if I can pull that up here real quick for you. Some documentation I wrote for a website this summer was we wanted to use some YAML templates in order to generate the same content over and over. So for example, in this one, what I did was I have different content for NetLab, and we have these pod install guides. And these pod install guides is just a set of Jinja templates that is the same for every single content, but it can read from a YAML file. Think of it like a config file or a Python file with a bunch of variables already set up. Then all you have to do is build this template out and plug that template in. So you'll notice where everything is bold in here. The language is the same no matter what content I pick, but the content inside here adjusts based off that template. And that's the beauty of Jinja templates. So while here it doesn't look like much, this number 2 is calculating based off the total number of PCs that are in my config file. So if you guys built out a config file, like say you had a lack of a good example, Pokemon cards or something, right? And you have all your Pokemon cards listed out. If you say the total amount of my Pokemon cards is blah, it will calculate the total length of the list, right? You don't have to calculate that. You just do len of list and it will automatically generate that number and dump it into your template. So if you adjust that on the fly, you don't have to go back and rebuild your website every single time you add or remove something. It will calculate those numbers on the fly. For example, further in here, we talk about this table here. It will dynamically add the actual rows in the table, and it will automatically calculate these rows because everything's Pythonic. Meaning I just do a for loop for each one of these. It will generate the formatted structure of that template over and over and over as it goes through a list. So I typically just feed this template a list. It puts in the virtual machine names. In this case, I feed it a list of dictionaries, right? I have a list of all the virtual machines as a dictionary. Each virtual machine is a dictionary. In that dictionary, it defines the virtual machine name, the total amount of RAM deployed, the max amount of gigabytes that it requires for memory or storage, right? So all of this kind of stuff can be calculated with Jinja templates, and it's pretty fun to use as opposed to having to hand calculate everything like you would in normal HTML. So we'll talk about that. As far as installation on your Python, it does require Python 3 or 9 or newer. Most of you should be using 3.13, I think is what we've been using so far for this class, so you're good there. There are some dependencies. You'll need this workspace, which depends on this WSGI. It's just a standard Python interface to use between applications and servers. Jinja will be our templating system. Marked safe comes with Jinja. It just escapes untrusted input when rendering templates so that you can avoid injection attacks. So my cybersecurity guys, we've talked about SQL injection attacks. This prevents that kind of thing from happening. It's dangerous, will securely sign data in its integrity. It's used to create your session cookie. So if you have people log into your project, which you will have to do in your Flask mini project, when they create a login, it sets a session cookie, and we have to make sure that's encrypted and not storing username and passwords and things like that in an unprotected manner. So you guys are going to learn how to do that the right way. And then Click itself is a framework that if you guys chose to use command line applications, it would give you a quote Flask command, and then you could give it some management commands to build out different templates, how to run it, etc. And then another package is called Blinker. This is support for signals. We won't really cover a lot of signals in here, but signals themselves are a lightweight way to notify subscribers of different events that are happening within the app. A good way to think about that is, say you are in your Gmail interface, right? And a new email comes in. There's a pop-up that comes up at the top and says you have a new message. That would be a signal for your application. So it may be that whatever your application that you're building, that you want to notify the user of something happening on the back end, maybe it uploaded the data or something like that. You could build a signal in order to notify the user. Other optional dependencies is python.env. This would pull your environment variables using .env for Flask commands. This is recommended if you are actually deploying this in production, right? We talked about API keys, right? And the ability of putting them in a separate file and pulling them in. This is the same way you could do this within Flask. And this would be a better way of doing this for production. And then last but not least is Watchdog, and that just provides a more efficient reloader for a development server. We won't actually use Watchdog in this case. All right. What that would allow you to do is watch your app. If you make a change in the app, it would automatically reload your web application so that you don't have to stop it and start it up again. All right. In Django, it does that automatically. In Flask, because it's very lightweight, it doesn't have that stuff built in. Okay. Greenlit, we won't talk about. We won't really use that. It does talk about virtual environments. Note, we already do that within our PyCharm editor, so we're good there. The instructions here are going to walk you through adding a virtual environment. We're going to skip that because we're actually going to create this as a Python project, just like we would before. So the best way to get started is come out here to your GitHub. We'll do a new, and I don't want to call this my mini project 3 because that's probably going to be something else. However, you can use the tutorial as a jump start for your mini project 3. In other words, it will get you about 50% of the framework of what you got to get done for mini project 3. You just have to do the other 50% in order to actually pull it off. So you could go ahead and call this mini project 3, or you could just call it Python tutorial, clone it later, add extra pieces, and now it's your mini project 3. That makes sense? I'm going to call it the Py tutorial, the Flask tutorial, just so we can keep it separate as it's not really mini project 3. So I got my Flask tutorial. We'll call this 2025. Like usual, we'll add a README and a get ignore for Python. And we'll ignore the license. Okay. So back in our PyCharm, we can come in here, go to our file, get project from version, click on our GitHub, and we should see our Flask tutorial 2025. Leave this window. And then down here on the right, we can go ahead and exclude that folder. We do need to configure an interpreter, so we'll go ahead and click on that. Add new interpreter, local interpreter, and hit OK. What that does is generate the virtual VMV, which is exactly what these instructions are telling you if you were developing straight off a console prompt. In our case, we use a nice IDE, so it's doing that same thing just within the IDE itself. Make sure all the skeletons and everything goes through like it's supposed to. Okay, so first thing we'll do, go ahead and change our get ignore, make sure that we add the PyCharm stuff in our case so that it's up to date. We'll take our README, and because this is just a template at this point, we can just say this is following the Flask tutorial. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and do our first commit just to make sure everything's working like it's supposed to. Go ahead and throw a commit message in there. And push it up. Okay, let's go back out here, make sure that it pulled everything, and it looks like it is. All right, so we're ready to go ahead and start this tutorial. First thing it's going to want us to do is go ahead and pip install Flask down below there. All right, so if we come back here, let's go to our terminal. Let's do a pip install Flask. Notice that Flask has a capital F. You'll see a bunch of packages that got pulled in there. And then it would be wise of us to go ahead and do our requirements right off the bat. So pip freeze greater than requirements.txt. And we have our requirements file. So we're good to commit that here in a little bit. As a matter of fact, let's just do that now. Again, the key here is to have lots of good commits when necessary. So added Flask and requirements.txt. Now's a good time to get in that habit of these little bitty commits for every single one of these, because as you start working on mini project 3 and 4, it's a lot more material. You're going to screw up at some point. It would be nice to be able to revert back if necessary.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
You just said that it's good to have lots of good commits. Is there a such thing as a bad commit?
In my eyes, the bad commit would be that you did like 40 changes before you did a commit.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like you did a massive chunk of the project and just didn't do a bunch of little commits along the way.
Okay, but there's not really something that's too small to do a commit, right?
No, it's actually better to do small commits than it is to do really large ones.
Okay.
In real production, and I just had this discussion with a bunch of Python developers the other day, they would rather see those little commits because what they can do when they actually merge that into the project. So for example, here we're doing everything in the main branch. Normally you would create a dev branch, do all your work there, then do a merge request to put it into your main branch. At the point of that merge, you can actually consolidate down all those little commits to one commit, and then it doesn't have all those extra little branches out there. Or there may be a reason not to do that. So a good example is if you have a lot of detailed notes in your commit files, you may not want to squash your commits, right? Because you want the detail of every single one of those commits to be in there. For example, when we use it in production, we tie in our ticket numbers. If there's a ticket number associated with whatever bug fix or whatever we're doing, if we do a bunch of those in one big push, which we shouldn't do, they should all be little ones. But if we do that and then we squash those commits, we lose all those notes. We would have to tag out the multiple tags that we had in there. So in this case, especially for this class, lots of little commits are a great idea. Why? You're learning, you're going to make mistakes. It's much easier to roll back at a little commit than it is to roll back a third of your project. Nobody wants to roll back a third of their project. And I see students do it every year. The key is commit and push. I see a lot of people are doing little commits. They never push it out to the system. That's why I tell you to do it right off the bat. In which case their laptop dies, something else, they're done. They lost all their work because they never pushed it out to GitHub, right? You can do all the commits in the world, but if you never push it to GitHub, GitHub never has a copy of it. Okay, small soapbox, stand down. And it's really for your benefit. I've seen kids cry over this here during this. They get so far, and I know they've worked really hard to make this work, and they just didn't think that through.
Jason, just to share with the team. So what I've been doing is I've been saving my local repository on the cloud, like Google Drive or OneDrive. So even if your laptop crashes, you still have those local repository saved.
Yeah, that works okay. In some instances, especially with a cloud-based one, things will get out of sync in that regard. I've seen that. So if you're always connected to the internet, it's not a big deal. But if you ever try to work offline, do a bunch of commits, and then you go back online and it doesn't quite sync up right, eventually you'll have some kind of error there. So it's a good practice as to what you're doing. But cloud services can throw a little monkey wrench into that from time to time.
Yes.
I myself do it that way in some cases, but there again, I've also had it where the cloud service screwed up the files. So as long as I'm always committing and pushing in small increments, I don't have to worry about it as much. So to get started, we want a minimal Flask application. It looks something like this. So from Flask, import Flask. So we're pulling in that class. And then from app equals Flask __ name. We want to set up an app route. So notice that we're going to the / of our website, right? The root of our website. We create a function called hello world, and we're going to return this simple little paragraph text of hello world. All right. So this is done without any HTML or anything else at this point. It's just a very simple website. So if we copy this into the main file over here, we obviously need to create a file in order for this to go into. We could save it into something called Hello Pi or similar. Let's go ahead and call it Hello Pi just to follow along here. So let's do a new Python file. We'll call it hello and add it to our repository and paste that in. All right. Now to run this project, as we go through here and look, it's going to come in and you need to run either Flask --app hello, because that's what we called it, right? This hello.py. And then we want to run it. So we give it the run command. The other option is to use python-m Flask, and then we tell it all those other options. Either way works. This is part of that whole Python CLI package that we brought in. It allows us to run this one-liner. So just like you did with your Streamlit, right? You had to have Streamlit, the name of your file, run, very similar within Flask. So let's copy that. Let's go down here to the terminal, and we'll run that little string. And you'll notice what it does is it creates a very simple development server running on port 5000 by default. By the way, that's a quiz question, so pay attention on that. Flask uses port 5000 by default. You do not want to use this for your production. In other words, don't take this, run this little Flask command and call that your production server. Bad things will happen. Like it's not meant to be robust. It's meant to be simply for development. So all we have to do is click on this link here, and you'll notice we get a nice little Hello World website up and going. Okay. If we look at this in the inspection, it is text. We'll notice that this paragraph text inside here is set up to show this over here. So if we go look, no, it really just wrote this HTML straight to the page. Okay. Very, very simple app. This is one way to run it. Down here at the bottom, you'll notice when I did a get, when I went to this web page, I got a get for the root. It also pulled some extra little tools and things like that. When I did an inspect here, you'll notice it looked for any app specific stuff. Got a 404. Does anybody remember what 404 is?
It's an error.
It is an error, but what specifically?
It's not available.
Neither one of those two. It's close on not available.
Timeout.
Nope, timeout's a different number.
Not found.
Not found. And so what that means is it didn't find whatever file or request that you were coming at. Now, I know it sounds like I'm being picky. All those other ones are actually other error numbers. They're very specific on their error numbers as they come through there. So I encourage you, if you're ever lost, come down here, look at this error, do a Google search, you'll get that error. It'll kind of point you in the right direction as to what's going on. Essentially, this is creating a log file, which by default does not get logged to an actual file. It gets written out to the screen. Very, very helpful when you guys are clicking around your project. Look for the log file to figure out what's going on. Now we're in the world of ChatGPT. You copy and paste that log file in. It will also help you because now it knows what the logs of the web server were. All right.
Guys, just trying to go to the favicon.icu.
Yeah, so the Favcon ICU is kind of a default one that you'll see in most web servers. It's looking for that file by default in a web browser. Chrome typically goes and looks for that one. And again, we're not hosting up that file, therefore it's a 404 not found. This one here didn't show up until I did an inspection. What that inspection does is it will go look and see if this file exists, because then it will have specific parameters for this website if you're trying to inspect it. Like maybe it has some colorizations or some other JSON tools to help that. It just can't find it, therefore it ignores it and does the default. For the most part, what's this 127.0.0.1? Any networkers in here?
Localhost.
Yep. So this is only running on my local host, meaning if I take the IP address of my actual machine, and I scroll up here and look at something like this one here. If I go to this IP address in this classroom,
Also,
you'll notice that I get no website, right? And the reason is we have it set up to only listen on 127.0.0.1 in production, okay? If you wanted to listen out there on your public IP address, or in your case, a private IP address, if you're behind a NAT, you would simply tweak your output when you run this command, and it would go to a different one. And we'll talk about that when we get to production. For example, here, it will tell you how you can push it out to a different public address or something else in there. A lot of times people will come in here and have this set up, and then they'll try to run it again, which is kind of hard to do, but you could come over here, for example, and I run that same command, the Flask dash app. If I try to run that again, which it should not have done, but it did it anyway, it should give you an error that I can't run on port 5000 because 5000 is already in place, which means somewhere along the line you have it up and running. Because this one's being executed inside of PyCharm, that's probably why it allowed it. If you ever go down to your command prompt and try to run that, it will end up giving you an OS error, and you'll see something like this, OS error 98, or even a win error. That basically means that you already have something running on port 5000, AKA you have Flask up and running somewhere else. Or maybe you're using something else on your computer that's using port 5000 for some reason, right? If that's the case, then you could go ahead and tweak that port number a little bit by passing the port, and you can make that working. On this host visibly external, if you just add -- host equals quad zeros, it's now going to listen on every interface on your laptop or desktop, right? This can be useful if you're trying to make it listen to like a public IP or a private IP. If you're here on campus in the classrooms, hardwired, you actually have a full-blown public IP running on this web server. Not a good idea, all right? Especially here on campus, you will get attacked quickly. So if you are on the Wi-Fi, not a big deal because you get private IPs off our Wi-Fi, but just know that if you're downstairs in one of the classrooms hardwired in, you do get a public IP, and it will be public if you're testing and running your code. I had a student do that, and then they got hacked within like 30 seconds because it's not a robust system, right? It's meant to be development. They threw in host, and people are constantly trying to attack our network here at Fort Hays. So, and you do get a public IP downstairs. So fair warning, that's what you get. Now, what's cool is if you end up running this and say you want to run this project at home. Now, we're a little ahead of ourselves, but if you wanted to run this project at home, you could run the quad zeros, find out what your private IP is on your laptop, maybe 192.168.1.10, for example, right? You could then go to your router and do a port forward and port forward anything from your public to port 5000. Like, for example, port 80 on the outside to 5000 on the inside. And now you're up and running this entire website locally at your house. You could do that, right? Really, really simple. There's a lot of other things you should be doing. You should, again, not be running it in the debug server. But if you're just doing it for a test example or something like that, it works really well. Okay. So that gets us up and running. You'll get this Flask part down here. What else was I wanting to show you in there? We'll talk about this app.py up here. Oh, I know what I want to show you. In our, let's close out of this. They are also going to show you in the tutorial how to run debug mode. And so by default, because you are using the development server, debug mode is enabled. And therefore, when errors happen on the website, you will see all of this get spit out to the screen. You just run -- debug and you would get the debugger on. To get the debugger, it ends up giving you some kind of pin here, and you can plug that in order to get the debug lines out of here, right? This is great if you're wanting to debug it live and try to see what's going on. You can plug that in so you can see your console directly right in the website. Works pretty slick. Let's see here. If you are returning any kind of HTML, which is the default response type in Flask, you can use the mark safe escape up here. And then when you use escape as a command, like escape name, that can make sure that you are not doing anything to untrusted data. So if you guys are trying to present something, for example, something like the user says, what's your name, right? Gets an input box. You return the name out to it. If they did some kind of weird scripting, it would give us some kind of alert bad script, right? It would actually inject JavaScript right into their command, which injects JavaScript right into your project. Not good. So that's the whole beauty of this escape portion. All right. One last thing I want to show you up here is this runs it via the command line. You can also do this directly baked into Django, or I'm sorry, directly baked into PyCharm. So if you come up here to this current file and do a drop down, we could do edit configurations. We will add a new configuration over here and let's choose Flask server. In which case over here on the right-hand side, we can see which script that we would want to work with. In this case, it would be our hello.py. We tell it what's our working directory, which would be just our current working directory. If we want to set any environment variables, we can do that live here. And then you would have an env file. If you have an env file, you can point this system to it and it would go. You want to set any specific Flask environment and variables, for example, development or production, you can tweak that and hit apply and then hit OK. Now, if I hit play up here at the top, it goes ahead and runs the entire app down here in a different one. So it's not at a terminal prompt anymore. It's actually running a web server. This is where sometimes people get in trouble because they'll come back over here to the terminal and try to run it. And it won't run. For whatever reason, it's running right now, and it shouldn't, because it should throw an error that there's already something running there. But usually that's the case. The beauty of using something like this is if I also do debug mode, which is the little one up here, it's automatically going to shove a bunch of debug stuff out here in the actual code. So either way is acceptable to run it. I personally like setting up this up here because then PyCharm knows that this is a Flask project and will set up and run a Flask server. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is routing. You notice when we go to a website, google.com, right? That's the simple root with the simple whack there. If we go to this website up above, we can see flask.paletteprojects.com/enable/stable/quick start. We would have to set up a route for this enable, quick start, etc. Right? Actually, Ian is English. Let's be focused here. So English, stable, and then the quick start project, all right? These are the different pages, so to speak, that you would have within your project. So if we want to add different routes, we use the route indicator, just like we did before. They call this a decorator. Anytime that you put this above your function code, this tells you where that decorator is going to point to, right? So we could have this, we could return instead of this little paragraph text, we could have something like index page, for example, and we could change this to index. All right. Oh, that really butchered it. There we go. And then we could also have something down here like what they have is an actual hello page so that you have to go to /hello in order to get the hello world part. So if we save this and run it, now, if we go to this website, you'll notice we end up at the index page. If we come up here and do a /hello, we'll get the hello world page. If we do a /ASDF, you'll get a page not found. Easy enough. Let's stop that down here. Okay. Other variable rules. So you can add variable names to the sections of the URL itself. So for example, if I want to go to, say, my user profile page, right? I could go with /user/ whatever username I want them to go to. You would want to use the greater than and less than symbols with the variable that you want to be placed in that section of your URL. So for example, if I have an app route set up here for /user/username, AKA whatever their username is, then I could go ahead and use the show user profile function with that username in order to gather information about their profile and then return that back to the user. Note that we want to use this from markup safe escape so that if they were to type anything into their profile page that would say reverse create a shell or all this goofy stuff you can do, this would escape all of that so that that wouldn't be possible. All right. You can also use this converter up here if you need to convert that variable name to some other type. Like, for example, a string or an integer or float, you could convert that in right on the fly. You can also do that because you're doing this within a quote unquote F statement. It would automatically take care of that as well. So a good example of that is if we're doing a blog, which is kind of what this initial project is doing, that you have a post and you could grab the post ID based off whatever integer that is, right? So it's an int of their post ID, post 1, post 2, post 3. We can then set up a route to pull that information out of our database and display it. Let's see, unique URLs and redirection behavior. So by default, we could return the project page, or we could return the about page like these are set up here. We could also do things where we want to redirect them to a different page. And note that we do not have a slash after, so this one has a slash. They must include the trailing slash. If they don't, and you just have something like this, if they put a trailing slash, it will say it's not found. So they're very canonical on their URLs, meaning that you have to have them in there if you want them to follow that behavior. In your URL building, to build a URL from a specific function, you can use the URL for command or function rather, and that will accept the name of the function in the first argument and any type of keyword arguments or something you have in there. So an example of that would be like from Flask import URL for, you got to have the function imported. And then down here, we could grab the user profile, and then we could grab this test request context, and we could get the URL for index, the URL for login, and the URL for login with a /next. That /next is going to redirect you to your homepage. So after they go to the login page, if they come back with a cookie, it's going to send them back to the main login page or the main homepage. If you go to the profile page, we could set it with a username of John Doe so that when they come here to John Doe, it dumps in John Doe into this username, right? It's just a way for you to build variables to kind of set all this kind of stuff up. Notice that we have this space in John Doe. That's why you see this %20 over here inside the URL. You guys have probably noticed this when you're in different URLs. You'll see %, you'll see and symbols, stuff like that. Those are all variables set across there. A good one is like if you go to, I don't know, Amazon, right? And I click on one of these little trend nets. You'll notice up here, I have question mark encoding. So this thing has a variable set for UTF-8. I also have this little one called PDRDW, and then it equals this content. And then I look at this Amazon symbol. It's basically tracking a bunch of cookies to see where I got to that link, right? You guys can build out those same URLs all the way down out in your project as well. All right. There's two main HTTP protocols you guys will be using when you get these. We've talked about these in your APIs, right? So by default, a route will only answer to GET requests, right? I want to get this website from there. You can use the methods argument of the route decorator to handle different HTTP methods. So for example, on this login page, I could have methods of get or post, right? I'm either going to ask for the page or I'm going to submit my data after they've filled out that login page to that page. Does everybody get how get and post works? So get gets me the original page. I fill out the form on the page. I hit submit. The moment I hit submit, I'm submitting that form back to the login page. And so we need to take two requests in order to do something with the post and something with the get.
So post is putting it back.
You got it. If there's a form on that page, you would have to have a way to post.
I mean, what it says, I'm getting a page and I'm posting back to it.
You got it. Exactly that. Yep. So to do that, you would have something like this where you say login, methods are get and post, and then down here in your function of login, you would say if the request method is post, do this, otherwise do this. Note that it has to be in this direction. You want to check for post first, then you want to do the get.
So if you're testing for post first, because why would you test for post first?
To see if they're submitting data to you. In other words, you don't want to re-render the page.
Like an RCC to a wedding website, you log into the wedding website, it gives me the form, I'm getting it, that form.
Right, but for you to log into the website, you have to post your information to the website.
To post my username and password.
Right. So by default, you would always do a get, but unless you're submitting data to me, which I want to check first, then I would go ahead and do whatever I'm supposed to do with that login. Otherwise, just show me the page.
So if it's like an RCP website, I say, hey, I have one for like my family, one for my friends. The family would want to log in, like, look at wedding registry or something like that.
Right.
I would have them a website that says, hey, if they go to this website, they need to post their username and password I gave them, like their one-time code.
Yes.
Where if I'm just, I have an announcement page, like I have a wedding on this date. You can come if you want to. They would get that page.
You got it.
There's nothing, I'm not interacting with it meaningfully other than receiving it.
Correct. However, when they first go to where they're going to submit their one-time code, that's a get.
Yeah, because they have to get the page.
They have to get
so
the
they can
page to post. Exactly.
So that's posting is basically I'm posting something to a web server. It's going to do something and give you something.
You got it. And almost 100% of the time, there's usually a form on the website.
Yeah,
A form of some sort that they're filling out.
So many questions now that I've had when I see getting post on websites. I'm like, what does this mean?
Yep. And the idea is that you can then see that down here in your logs. So every time I requested those two pages, the regular route, it was a get. If I did route hello on a get, and if I did a get for a page that didn't exist, you'll note I get a 404. Does anybody remember what 200 is?
Doesn't that
That's
mean it's okay?
Okay, right?
Response okay, which means here's your response, everything's valid. Okay. Let's see here. You can do it in this fashion as we showed up here. You can also create just two separate views. So if you do a .get, you could do a login, and then this would be for the get stuff. If you do a .post up here, it would go ahead and do this stuff. Either one of those two are acceptable in order to create that. All right. This is just a shortcut that's built in with Flask. Let's see here. That all makes sense. Static files. So the URL for static files, sometimes when you build dynamic web applications, they'll need static files. This is like your CSS or maybe your JavaScript, things like that. Ideally, the web server is configured for you to actually serve them up, but during development, you could do that as well. Just create a folder called static in your package or next to your module, and then it will be available as /static on the application itself. So to generate the URL for static URLs, we use a special static endpoint name, this here, and file name, whatever that may be. This would serve up static/style.css so that somebody could go to that and pull that information. So later on, when you guys are dealing with your templates, you will have to create these URL for static files and do a static entry. Typically, the only two things you will serve up is CSS and JavaScript for the most part. If you are hosting pictures on your website, that would also go into the static folder. If you are hosting a URL or an image on the website, but it's actually part of Google Images and you're just pointing them to the URL so that you don't have to host it, that one you would not use a static file for that. Does anybody know why you would want to either statically put that picture on your web server or point to a URL that's out on the internet? There's pros and cons to both.
I don't know
Speed,
why.
right? The speed and the quality
Yep.
resolution, I guess.
You could use a cloud hosting
Pixels.
service, and therefore it would get cached, and therefore it would be faster. Yep. And like you said, quality, it could actually dynamically change that based off your call. So some cloud hosting services is you could request a thumbnail so that it automatically generates a thumbnail back and not the full image, that kind of thing.
What if you want to do something like
Isn't it to stabilize the picture?
What was that question?
Isn't it for like more stabilization?
It can be, but here's the problem. What if you're trying to get this website offline? You
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now all of a sudden you're going to miss all the images out of your project, right?
Mhm.
Really depends on your use case for your project. Do you want it going out there? Now, if you're hosting this on your own little server, what's one thing that you have to think about when you're hosting your own website generally out on the internet?
well, if I'm hosting like a high-res image, say like of the wedding photo, I'm just using this wedding thing because it makes sense to me. It's a big
Yep.
high-resolution image. If I have it stored on like another website, like if I have my own web page, I would have to serve that. Maybe it's a gigabyte file for whatever reason. I'm serving that to every customer. Where if I have it pointed to a web host, it would pull their traffic down and show it.
You got it. So the idea there is the one reason to use a caching server or something like that is that you are not paying for that traffic of that request. You're usually paying for a service. They have X amount of traffic associated with that service for hosting that file up. That allows you to get you guys get this advertised to you in Facebook and all these other places, right? $3 for your own web server for a month for this own web. Well, you have so much data that you can serve up bandwidth wise. This would help keep that under because you're letting something else cache that maybe doesn't have
Google
limits.
Photos or something.
You got it. Yep. Where it just serves it up because it's part of that service.
Would you also do like if you wanted to have for example, let's say you have a webcam and it's taking photos and it wants to post the most recent photo up there, would that be another reason to have it? So it's not.
It could, yeah. Or if you're pulling from a cloud service, something like that.
Or
Yep.
like it changes or something.
Typically, the only thing you would want is CSS and JavaScript. Now, with that being said, I will show you guys eventually one called Bootstrap, which is a CSS, HTML, China JavaScript library that builds responsive websites for you. You'll notice when you actually install this that you can either A, download the CSS and JavaScript directly for you to host in that static files like we said, or you can use the CDN in which you just link directly to those files off the website. All right. Again, the only problem with this is great because if there's any changes or updates, you automatically get those files. The problem is you want to use this website offline. You don't have a way to go pull those JavaScript files, right? Therefore, your website's going to look all broken and ugly because it can't go out and grab the renderings that you were looking for. So again, you just have to think about how your project's going to be used. All right, so to render templates, when generating HTML from within Python, it's not really fun. Otherwise, you have to do a lot of coding for HTML on top of your Python stuff. It's actually pretty cumbersome because you'll have to do a bunch of HTML escaping on your own in order to keep the application secure. Because of that, Flask configures the Jenga template engine for you to use automatically. Templates can be used to generate any type of text file. For web applications, you'll primarily want to be generating HTML pages, but you can also generate markdown, plain text for emails, or anything else in between. For a reference to HTML and CSS, then other web APIs, you can go to MDN. We're not going to go there. But to render a template, you just use the render template method. All you have to do is provide the name of the template itself and the variables you want to pass to the template engine as keyword arguments. Here's an example of how to render that template. It looks like this. You import the module from Flask, import render template. You have your home page, or this hello page rather, hello/name. And in that hello/name, we are going to pull in some kind of name and render the template hello.html. So we create an HTML file called hello, and then we're going to use that as a template inside of there. The beauty of that is inside your project, you will typically have a templates folder. Inside that templates folder, you will then have your HTML file in there. Okay. You can also do it in a way that you have your overall application. You have an init file, which will initialize this as a module. You'll have your templates inside there and your hello file inside that. Again, the beauty of an HTML template would look something like this. So we set our title to hello from Flask. If there is a person defined, because we can run Python stuff right in our template. Notice the idea here is that you use this curly brace and a %. Anything inside of that is just raw Python at that point. All right. Now, there's only certain things you can do there, but Jinja templates will show you what you can and can't do. This allows us to do regular logic check. If there was a person defined, then we're going to go ahead and set our hello JSON or whatever up here at the top. Otherwise, we'll say hello world. A good example of this is a login page, right? You may have something like if we have a person, that means they're logged in. So we'll say hello JSON. If they're not logged in, then we can say sign up here or click here for more information so that they can sign up and register your website. We can do logic, aka build which file they're going to get served based off some parameter that we have passed along. So you may check for a session cookie. If a cookie exists, do this. If it does not, get them to do something so that we have a cookie inside of there. All right. And that's what you see down here. So inside templates, you have access to the config file. You have access to requests, sessions, and G objects. G objects would be your SQLite. That's what I was trying to pull. That would be your database connections that you would have to the backend. You can also get flash messages. This is what I was talking about before, where we could have signals, and this would allow us to have a flash message on the screen. The templates are really awesome because they allow what's called inheritance, all right? And what that needs to, or we'll talk about template inheritance here in a little bit, but basically for every website, I want this as my top, this is my bottom, and I want a sidebar here on the left. I design the layout. I call that my base.html. Then all my other pages inherit that so that anytime I want to make tweaks to the layout of something, I just adjust the base.html. I don't have to go back and adjust every single web page that I designed. Does that make sense? So if I like my style where I've got a nice little drop-down bar at the top, a sidebar, and maybe a footer across the bottom, I dump all that into my base HTML. Then all my other templates can import from that. If I want to make a change on my website, I go change my base and everything looks the same. So we'll do that as part of this template here. Automatic escaping is enabled by default. So if a person contains HTML or something is containing HTML that you're going after, it's automatically escaped. If you trust a variable and you know it to be HTML safe, for example, maybe because it came from a module that converts wiki markup or something like that, then you can mark it as HTML safe just by marking the safe class outside here where you have this pipe safe. It will automatically mark it as safe and dump whatever you have inside there. All right. This here would be a markup safe. Again, it's going to allow the strong with like a blink hacker you could put after the fact, and it's going to end up escaping that blink hacker so that you just get the regular context. Okay. Let's see here. You can request data. So for web applications, it's crucial to be able to interact with data on a server. And in this Flask information, we're going to use a global request agent. This is so that we can pull things back. So like here, you would have something like app.test request context of /hello with a method of post. And then we tell them what kind of request we want. So the request path is hello. The method is post. We can get that information out of there. It's good for doing logs or context inside of there. To get that request, we do from Flask import request. And therefore down here, we would see something like this. So on a /login, we have our methods of post and get. When they go to this login page, if there is no error, we set it to none. Otherwise, by default, we can update that error up here. If the request method is post, then we're going to run our valid login, in which case we would request our form of username and password. Notice request username or request.form username, request.form password. And then we would return the user to the log the user in function, in which case we would pass their username to that. We would have another function down here that would then absorb that username so that we could keep passing these variables through our project. Else, we set our error to invalid username and password, in which case that would only get executed if we end up rendering this template with the error to the screen. And therefore, we could have a pop-up on the screen that says invalid username and password, or update the form so that the text shows up. You guys get this all the time when you go to log into something, right? If I come back here to say the Flask tutorial, I'm trying to think of a website. How about not Blackboard? How about Workday? Sure. I come in here, type this, hit sign in, and this right here set me back to the exact same page, but through an error. And in this case, if I look at this inspection, you'll notice that this has the ID of error. It has a class of the different type of text, in this case, small margin red, and then it dumps that error code right in above our login form. You guys will create this same type of error. But you'll notice on the first page, if I refresh this, and actually don't go to the error, but just go to, say, Workday, you'll notice that this error currently has no text inside of it, right? If I look here, style, display none because there's nothing here. If I try to log in and I hit sign in, you'll notice that now we have this span of this error text and the role is alert, therefore it's using red. And if we look inside of there, there's the text that we're passing in back from the project. So you guys will build this similar type thing on your logins to your project. All right. You can have key errors, which would be raised if it's not a valid type key or that key doesn't exist when you're doing a search. If you are having somebody upload a file, you could use the /upload page again for a get and post, and then you tell it what file we're uploading and where you want to save it on your server. Obviously, you want to be careful when you do this kind of thing because it allows people to upload files to your server. Does anybody know why this may be a problem?
You use up all the storage and cost you a lot of money, I guess.
Yeah, it could chew up your storage, but as cyber guys, what does this mean?
It means they can upload malware.
You got it. I could upload a HTML file, and then because you have maybe a route that allows me to go straight to that file, I now just executed that file on your system. So this is how you build in backdoors and things you don't really want. So you just have to be careful what they're submitting. They can also do this just by setting the correct file name, meaning when I tell it to upload whatever file name, that file name in and of itself could be a Linux command, which would then come back and cause a problem. That's why we want to pass it through the secure file name function, which makes sure that whatever we're saving is a secure file name, stripping off any kind of Linux commands that may be running inside of there. Right. It does have a better section here for uploading files. We're not going to necessarily pay through that part of it. Cookies. So like I said before, when you have somebody log in and they come back to your website, you want them to automatically be logged in or at least store information about a user so that we can pull that rather quickly out of their cookie. Therefore, we can set up cookies with request.cookies.get and their username, and then we can store cookies inside their browser as they're going through. If you guys remember, when you go up here and flush your history, that also deletes all the cookies. You would see the cookie information in there. So I obviously don't want to show the cookies here on this recording of things in my browser, but it stores things like your username, generally not your password, but a bunch of identifiable information, but not super secret identifiable information. Okay. Let's see, redirects and errors. We would use a redirect function in order to redirect us to a different URL. Note that we're using a function inside of a function here. So we have a URL for, which means it's going to generate the URL for login. Then we're going to pass that to the redirect function so that it actually returns us to that URL. Okay. We can use an abort function where we abort to a specific error, for example, 401. And then this thing underneath here never gets executed. Once we run the abort, it literally aborts that function. Okay. We could do error handling inside here where if you want a specific 404 page, maybe we want to render our own 404 not found page so that we don't get something that looks like this one, which is not running because our server's not running. Something like that. Instead of getting this default one, we could generate our own 404 page where you could say, oops, not found. You may see this on Amazon. It's the little dog when you try to go to a thing that doesn't exist anymore. That's there. Or maybe on the Google pages, you'll see something like that. All right. Also things you can do on there. You can use JSONify if you want to respond back in JSON. This could be helpful if maybe you're building an API type thing. For example, here, where a common request is writing an API is out to JSON. So you could use Flask to build your own JSON, or I'm sorry, yeah, your own API that spits out JSON. Therefore, we would collect all the information from that particular user, send it out in a JSON formatted structure back out to the end person, right? We have sessions, which are going to be set up kind of like our cookies, right? So sessions are implemented on top of cookies for you to sign cookies cryptography. This means that the user could look at the contents of your cookie, but they can't modify it unless they know the secret key for that. This allows us to set our own secret key so that we could then pull back their cookie and decrypt some of the information that's inside of that. Okay. We'll talk about how to create your own secret keys down here. And this is something you would want to run when you actually deploy in production. You would want to make sure that it generates this random token and hex not something that you want to specifically tell it what it is. Good applications and user feedback, aka pages that you build, should give the user some kind of good feedback. In this case, it has a flash system that allows you to flash a message out to the user if there's an issue or something going on. All right. Logging, just like we did back in Python 360 at the end, if you guys remember, we built in logging into our projects. Similar here in a web format that we could use the app.logger and we could set debug warnings or error level commands, and that way you could set them out to a log file down the way. Let's see, middleware, we're not going to necessarily use that in this class. There are Flask extensions, for example, Flask SQL Alchemy, that allows you to set up a little bit easier SQL Alchemy support. We're not necessarily going to work with that. And then how you would go about deploying that out to production. Okay, so that's just the quick start of getting everything in there. What we really want to do is get out to the tutorial itself. So we're going to scroll down here to the tutorial, and we have our project set up as we see down here. So in this case, they want us to create a folder called Flask tutorial. We'll go into that folder, and then we're going to have our quote unquote help, our hello pie that's set up here, right? In the end of your project, we'll have something that looks like this, all right? So we have our Flask tutorial folder. We're going to end up creating a Flask.r folder, a test folder, virtual env file, which is already one that we have, a project.toml, and a manifest in. Okay. In our case, we won't have a project.toml. We're actually going to use requirements.txt for our purpose, but we'll talk about that in a little more. You may have a get ignore. These are extra things that you would want to put in your get ignore. It turns out that the get ignore that we already have has that stuff in it. So if we come over here, look at our get ignore, you'll notice up here at the top, we have some of those same things already set up in that. So we should be good. All right, so let's see here. We're going to need to start out by creating our project directory, which we have here. Mine's called Flask Tutorial 2025. That's fine. If we scroll down, we should have a Flask.r folder. So let's do a new folder, Flask.r. And we should have a new folder called tests. And we're a little early for these, but that's okay to go ahead and set that part up. And make sure we have our virtual VMV file, which we already have set up. Okay, so this all looks good. And we have this hello.py, which is what got us started. We will actually end up trashing that here in a second. So Flask itself is an instance of a Flask class. Everything about the application, including its configuration, the URLs, everything else is registered to that class. So when we did that hello world, you're just going to have the one simple page. But if your project gets bigger, that gets a little trickier. So typically you want to create what's called an application. And to do that, we created our Flask.r directory. Then we want to create an init.py file. That means when we call that directory, it immediately runs that particular application or that file inside of there, telling us that in Python that the Flask.r directory should be treated as its own individual package. So we already created our Flask.r directory. We now need to create this __init__.py. Okay, so let's copy this. Let's go into our init folder. We're going to come up here to our Flask.r and create a new Python file, 2 underscores, and init __, and hit enter. That creates our py file, and we'll put that stuff in there. Okay. So what does all that code actually do? The first thing it's going to do is come in and create an app, which we'll set up from our application factory. You'll add it later in there, but it already does a lot. It tells you all the different things in there. We have our app config mapping. This is going to set up our secret key. Right now, it's just the word dev. For a database, we're actually going to use a SQLite database that will run on top of our site here. The key about SQLite is it's just a flat file that you guys will have access to. In most of your projects, you guys will create different columns and SQL things. We'll talk about what that all looks like in this side. In Flask, we actually have to write that all by default. In other words, you guys will have to write SQL by hand. When we do that within Django, there's some modules or some middleware in there that will handle that stuff for us. All right, this config.py file allows us to have extra things set inside of it. It's kind of like when you guys created the mystocks.py when you did that one and plugged in your different stock names. Same concept here, that config.py allows us to pull information out of there. Much like you did with your APIs, where you put your API in a separate file and then imported it in, that's what this would do here. And we have our app route. So if we want to see what this looks like to get our Flask page up and running, we can copy this command, come down here, and stop our current one. And then in the terminal, we could run Flask R run. Notice the difference here is it's now running Flask R straight off this folder, which will then run this init file immediately on this side. If we go look at the page and hit enter, you'll notice we have nothing here. Does anybody know why we have nothing there? If we look at this code.
What was the question, Jason?
So when we went out here to our website, you'll notice that it says not found. Is there?
I was looking for index HTML.
Nope, we're not looking for an index. It's that we don't have a route set up for the slash.
Oh, correct. That's right. Yeah.
Yep, so we just have one set up for hello. Therefore, if we have the route of hello, there we get our hello world. Note that if I put a slash after hello, again, nothing's found. It's very specific as to whatever you set up in your routes down here at the bottom. Okay, so don't freak out if you get this up. You're more than likely just don't have the proper route set up in order for it to handle that. Okay, again, this code here in the middle, this part here, just checks to see if you have a config.py file. If so, go ahead and read the values out of it. If you don't, just ignore it. We'll go ahead and run everything as if it's a test. Okay. This one here also ensures that there's some kind of folder set up, just like we did within our projects. It makes sure that we have some kind of folder. In this case, it's looking for the app instance, making sure that we have this Flask R folder set up and working correctly. So at this point in the project, we can go ahead and delete our hello. We don't need that. That'll just cause some confusion. We can go ahead and stop our project down below. We will need to edit our configuration up here if you're going to use this server. And instead of using the hello.py, we actually want to just run Flask R. All right, we'll hit apply and OK. And then if we run our project, again, this is working, do a /hello, and you can see it goes out to our project. All right, so I'll stop this server. We'll come up over here at the top and we'll do our commit. And just say, started the tutorial, if I could spell today, and set up our init.py, or set up Flask R. All right, we'll commit and push. Push. It looks like we got it out there. Just double check and make sure it got there. If it did, we should have a Flask R folder, which we have now. And if we go in that folder, you can see we have our init.py file inside of there. Okay. We didn't make it super far today because we went through that quick start, but that's always good that you have an idea of all these different functions. We will reference those and go into each one of those in detail here very shortly. Today, we're already at the 251 mark, so we will pick up with this on Thursday. More than likely, we will run into Tuesday of next week, just getting through the tutorial. And by Thursday of next week, we should be able to give you a quick start on your mini project. All right. Let's see here. I'm gonna leave the recording going and I want to show you just real quick on your mini project 3, just so you have an idea of what we're going to be working for. In this one, you guys are going to deploy some web application of your own choice. In other words, I'm no longer giving you, you have to do this. You guys have to come up with some web app, all right? It just needs to meet these requirements down below. So in this case, you're going to set up Flask. You have to set up the proper structure. You can use that tutorial as an example. You will need at least 5 pages on your project, all right? And it has to use a proper template structure. We'll cover all of what that means. You will at least have to have 1 page that utilizes a form and has proper get and post route set up. Turns out this will be your login page by default, right? You will be required to have something like a login page. You'll need to set up a SQLite database that has a minimum of 2 tables linked together with a foreign key. We'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. You will need to use Bootstrap in your web templates. I don't dictate exactly how you do that, but I need you to make use of at least 1 modal. We'll talk about what that looks like. And you'll need some sort of register and login system. The tutorial kind of walks you through that. Need to be a minimum of 5 commits on your project, and back to the requirements and making sure your README is clean. Note on the README, you'll need to explain the steps of actually initializing the database, how to rerun the development server in order to run your project. Right. Again, we'll go in great detail on this on next Thursday, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea as we go through this tutorial what to be looking for. All right. Anybody have any questions? I know I talk fast. I know I'm going to be getting through a lot of material in 2 weeks. So if you guys have questions, pause me, time me out, ask questions, because I guarantee somebody else listening to the recording has the question. They just don't have the ability to ask it because they're watching it. All right. If I'm going too fast over a concept or you need me to go back through it, I'm going to run that based off your feedback. That's why I say sometimes it takes 1 day, sometimes it takes 3 days. It all depends on how quickly you guys are absorbing it.
So there's some quick questions. So Flask is the lighter version of Django, correct?
That's one way to put it. Flask is very basic in that you kind of have to create all the niceties, where Django is like the kitchen sink that comes in and has a lot of things built in for you. So like, for example, we have this login page and log out page and all that kind of stuff in Flask. You have to write those by hand. In Django, that kind of stuff is automatically handled, including saving your password securely. All that kind of stuff is kind of built into Django. Here, we got to write it from scratch.
Do industries look for both skills?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And honestly, it works very similar between the two. It's just a structure thing in between them. What's nice about Flask is if you need to get something up and running fast, it's kind of like Streamlit. You can get it up and running without all the extra frills or the heavy lifting of something like Django. If you're building a full-blown web application with a database backend and you're doing a lot of stuff in it, Django is going to be your better pick.
Makes sense.
In other words, I can't even begin to tell you at this point how many websites I've built with Django. No matter how small or simple they are, it's just once you learn that structure, it's easy to get things spun up and get moving. I've also built a number with Flask that I just needed a really basic website to serve up to somebody for some example or a quick level something. Flask is super simple for that. For example, I wanted to serve up a page that had a bunch of downloads for people, and I just wanted it up and running in a short amount of hours. Flask worked perfect for that. One example was this last summer, I was building I was doing a workshop for a bunch of college professors, and I was sharing materials out to them on the fly. So when we would talk about something, I needed to send them a link to a URL or a page to go do this or steps that they should be completing. None of that was written ahead of time. And doing that inside of a Zoom meeting and copy and pasting that to chat, as you guys know, it breaks all the formatting whatsoever. So what I did was I built a simple little blog style Flask project that just dumped that on the screen. All I had to do was come in here and modify one of my Jinja templates, add whatever steps I wanted in pure Markdown, restart the project by hitting Control-C down here, then hitting go again, and they would immediately refresh the page on their side and have all the steps and instructions on how to do that. It was a really simple, cool project that allowed me to build a website on the fly while I was working with somebody in a workshop environment. For whatever reason, that blew their minds when we were doing that during the summer, because it was actually pretty cool because it allowed me to build it without having to have anything predefined ahead of time. I actually had to do that on a different laptop, or I would show you that project. I don't have it currently here. I don't believe. Find out if it actually showed up here. Let's see, PyCharm. Nope, it's not on this project, but I'll show you it as an example on Thursday so you guys get an idea of what a quick Flask project will look like. All right, we'll see you on Thursday. Again, we'll keep running the tutorial. The tutorial here is really good. It's like Django's tutorial. That's actually how I learned Flask and Django originally, before I actually took some, I don't want to say training from some professionals, but at the end of the day, they were basically like, yep, this is what you would do. This is what you would tweak. The tutorials got me the basics so I could talk intelligently to the developers of the stuff I was wanting to do at the time. No, this was like 15 years ago when I was doing that. So in other words, I could understand the templates. I could understand the lingo that they were doing. I would still have to go look up what I wanted to do, but I could talk intelligently as to what I was trying to accomplish. So when we come back on Thursday, we will start here with the database section and creating our own database and how that works. Cool.